There are territories where nature offers no reprieve, where a single mistake can be the last, where every hurricane writes the history of those who live there. It arrives on a forecast track, yet its impact is devastating. It carries a name, a trajectory traced across weather charts. Its winds can tear soil from the ground, while the sea advances without warning. The Caribbean is one of those regions. Each season, nature reminds everyone who sets the rules, and who is left to endure them. Across exposed islands and flood-prone deltas, communities that have lived with hurricanes for generations are not ethnographic postcards. They are real societies in places where the Atlantic's most destructive cyclones make landfall, and they remain. Welcome to Planet Tribes. Today we will journey through 5 of these communities, each rooted in a different landscape, repeatedly struck by disasters that have erased homes, crops, and roads. We will examine what was lost, how survival became possible, and what threat now looms as hurricanes grow increasingly intense. By the final stop, we will understand what it truly means to face a storm with nowhere left to hide. Before we reach that point, we begin in a territory where danger does not arrive with the wind alone. Sometimes it moves silently, driving the sea up beneath your feet. The Lokono are one of the oldest indigenous peoples of the Caribbean mainland. They inhabit the low-lying coasts and vast river deltas of northeastern South America, Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana. There, the ocean and the rivers fight over the land every day, and the boundary between sea and continent shifts with every tide. Long before maps existed, they were already here. The sea we now call the Caribbean took its name from island peoples, but the Lokono, of Arawak origin, had occupied the mainland for generations, adapting to an environment that was never stable. Here, danger is not an exception. The land barely rises above sea level. In some places, it isn't even a meter. When a cyclone enters from the Atlantic, the water does not arrive in just one way. It falls from the sky, pushes in from the coast, and surges upriver at the same time. You are there, between wind and tide. You hear the roar of the water and feel the ground giving way beneath your feet. Every path disappears as everything around you floods. Water surrounds the houses, and once everything is covered, there is no longer time to escape. The only option left is to endure. In September 2004, Hurricane Ivan devastated much of the Caribbean. Although its main impact occurred on islands such as Grenada and Jamaica, storm surge and powerful wave action also affected the northern coast of South America. Lokono communities along the Guyanese shoreline and in areas near the Orinoco Delta saw water advance inland within hours. There was no time to save crops or food reserves, only time to find higher ground and hold on. It was not an isolated event. In 1988, rainfall linked to Hurricane Joan caused severe flooding in Lokono territories. In 1999, extreme precipitation associated with La Niña submerged entire settlements in Suriname for weeks. Again and again, the water arrives, destroys what has been built, and the community starts again from scratch. Now the question becomes inevitable. How many times can a community start over before starting again ceases to be an option? And the answer lies not only in their resilience, but in the way they have learned to live with water. Over generations, the Lokono understood that resisting does not always mean opposing the river or the ocean. Their traditional homes are raised on hardwood stilts, lifting the living space between 1 and 2 meters above ground level. This is not a temporary solution. It is architecture designed so that water can flow around it, but never through it. Their food system follows the same logic. Crops such as cassava, yam, and other tubers are planned to be harvested before cyclone season. Cassava is transformed into cassabay, a dry bread that can be stored for months without refrigeration. This isn't tradition for tradition's sake. It is a system designed to survive when everything else fails. Today, the greatest danger is no longer only the passage of a hurricane. Sea levels are rising steadily. In some areas of Guyana and Suriname, land is disappearing permanently. Places that were once gardens, villages, or cemeteries have been swallowed by the water and will not return. With the land, memory is lost as well. Even so, the Lokono maintain a margin of retreat toward firmer ground. What comes next is the story of a people who cannot retreat because they live where land and water never fully separated. A territory where danger does not arrive only from outside, because it has always been there. In the heart of the Orinoco Delta, the ground ceases to be ground and water becomes home. And in that unstable world, cyclones do not only destroy, they drown. Warao means, in their own language, the people of the canoes. It is not a symbolic name. It is an exact description of their reality. The Warao live in the Orinoco Delta in Venezuela, one of the largest and most complex wetland systems in the Western Hemisphere. A network of rivers, channels, swamps, and mangroves covering more than 25,000 square kilometers. A territory where solid ground is the exception, and where, for much of the year, moving on foot is impossible. They have lived here for thousands of years, developing a way of life adapted to an environment where water never fully retreats. Their homes are built on stilts driven directly into the riverbed. There are no villages by the water. The villages are in the water. Everything, mobility, food, exchange, depends on the canoe. The axis of their survival is the Maurice palm. From it, they obtain fibers for ropes and roofing, lightweight wood for structures, edible fruit, and, in extreme situations, the inner pith, which can be chewed as a last resort when nothing else remains. For the Warao, Maurice is not merely a natural resource. It is their lifeline. When a tropical storm enters through the Gulf of Paria and moves toward the Orinoco Delta, the impact is immediate. The danger is not only the rain, it is the sudden rise in water levels. Channels that are normally half a meter deep can exceed 2 meters within hours. Water stops being a stable environment and becomes a moving mass. Imagine you are there at that moment. The canoe strikes vegetation that was once anchored to the ground. Currents shift without warning. The stilts begin to creak. The river widens until every reference point disappears. And when everything moves at once, there's no shore left to return to. Stilt houses are designed for slow, seasonal flooding. But when water levels rise abruptly, the lateral force tests their limits. The pilings shift, structures deform, and in some cases collapse. What remains are floating timbers in a landscape where the river no longer recognizes its own channel. In 1999, Hurricane Brett, one of the few cyclones to significantly impact the South American Atlantic in recent decades, caused widespread flooding in the Delta. Humanitarian organizations documented forced displacements, entire families compelled to abandon their homes with only what they could carry in a canoe. And in a world where everything moves by water, Whatever does not fit into a canoe is lost forever. The Warao response to this cycle of destruction rests on two pillars. The first is rapid reconstruction. Their homes can be rebuilt in a matter of days using materials the delta itself provides: palm, bamboo, and mangrove wood. There are no roads, no trucks, no concrete, and none are necessary. The architecture is designed to fall and to rise again. The second pillar is more fragile and far more valuable: knowledge of the water. Warao elders understand the behavior of each channel according to season, moon phase, and upstream rainfall. They know when levels will rise before the water begins to swell. They know which areas drain first and which become traps. That knowledge determines where to build, when to move, and when to remain. Today, that ancestral knowledge faces a different threat than any cyclone. More and more Warao youth migrate to Venezuelan cities, driven not only by climate disasters, but by the country's economic crisis. When the bearer of knowledge leaves, the knowledge does not always travel with them. And when elders age far from the delta, unable to transmit it, a chain that took centuries to form is broken. The Warao have survived for generations in a world ruled by water. Now the origin of the story changes, but not the threat. The next people did not arrive in the Caribbean by choice, but by expulsion. In their identity converge exile, coastline, and a cycle of hurricanes that would define their destiny. We moved to the Caribbean coast of Central America, facing the open sea, where villages of wood and palm stand on the front line. Here, every wave and every gust of wind shapes daily life. It is in this territory that the Garífuna people live. In 1797, the British Empire deported several thousand Garífuna to the island of Roatan, off the coast of Honduras. They were a community formed from the union of Indigenous Kalinago and freed Africans on the island of St. Vincent. The objective was clear: break their cohesion, isolate them, and erase them as a people. It didn't work. From Roatan, the Garífuna expanded along the Caribbean coast of Central America. Today, they are present in Honduras, Guatemala, Belize, and Nicaragua. They number more than 600,000 people, with an extensive diaspora in cities such as New York, Houston, and Los Angeles. Yet their cultural core remains anchored in small coastal villages. Communities built facing the sea, exposed each season to wind, storm surge, and extreme rainfall. In October 1998, Hurricane Mitch stalled for days over the Gulf of Honduras. It reached sustained winds of up to 285 kilometers per hour and unleashed torrential rains that caused rivers to overflow and devastated the coastline. Tens of thousands of people died across Central America. Mitch became one of the deadliest Atlantic hurricanes of the 20th century. For the Garífuna, Mitch was not only a natural disaster, it was a cultural catastrophe. Entire neighborhoods along the Honduran coast disappeared. Churches where dugu ceremonies, rituals of communication with ancestors, were held, were destroyed. Fishing boats, the economic backbone of these communities, were swept out to sea or smashed against reefs. When the water receded, the landscape was no longer recognizable. And yet, something drew attention even from those who arrived to help. Many homes built according to traditional Garífuna principles withstood the storm better than modern constructions erected beside them. Flexible wooden and palm structures capable of bending without collapsing. Low roofs that did not act like sails in the wind. Materials the surrounding environment could replace within weeks. It was not fragility. It was accumulated knowledge. Barely 2 years later, in 2000, Hurricane Keith struck Belize with winds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. For Garífuna communities in the south of the country, it was a second blow before they had recovered from the first. Fishing nets rebuilt with effort were lost again. Cassava and plantain gardens were once more submerged. The cycle repeated itself. What allows the Garífuna to endure is not only material reconstruction, but a social structure that distributes the burden of survival. Garífuna families function as networks connecting the Caribbean coast with the urban diaspora. When a hurricane destroys a house in Trujillo or along the Belizean shoreline, relatives in New York or Toronto send money, materials, and support. It is a transnational response to a local disaster, and it has proven as effective as many external interventions. But today, the threat no longer arrives only with the wind. Mass tourism and real estate interests advance over the same coasts where the Garífuna have lived since the late 18th century. In Honduras and Guatemala, entire communities have been displaced from ancestral lands to make way for resort developments. Economic pressure and climate pressure converge at the same point, the coast. And when the coastline disappears, so does the space where this culture can exist. If you believe these stories deserve to be told with rigor and respect, show your support with a like. It is a simple way to say that this work matters. And don't leave, because what comes next is even more decisive. The Garífuna arrived on the continental Caribbean through the force of an empire. The people we will meet next arrived driven by something different: geography itself. An archipelago located in the heart of the hurricane corridor, where survival has always depended on the balance between what the sea grants and what it claims back. Here, the Caribbean is not a continuous mass of land. It fractures into hundreds of low-lying islands, aligned like a fragile boundary between the ocean and the mainland. More than 365 coral sand islands, so small that some can be crossed in just a few minutes. So low that almost none rise more than 2 or 3 meters above sea level. On these islands lives the Guna people. Around 50,000 people, distributed across some 49 communities, have built their lives on ground the sea can cross from shore to shore. They arrived here centuries ago, migrating from the Darien mainland, and over time they created something exceptional, one of the most solid forms of indigenous self-government in Latin America. The Guna Yala Comarca has its own laws, local congresses, and a collective decision-making system that has endured empires, republics, and external pressures. But there is a force that recognizes neither borders nor autonomy. Coral islands are not solid land in the traditional sense. They are living accumulations, slowly formed by reefs. The same sea that sustains them can reclaim them patiently, or erase them in a single night when a storm arrives. In 1988, Hurricane Joan, with winds reaching 245 kilometers per hour, did not strike these islands directly, but it pushed the ocean toward them. The storm surge completely covered several of the smaller islands. In some cases, water crossed from one side to the other without leaving a single high point to retreat to. Evacuations were carried out in dugout canoes in the middle of the storm toward larger islands or the mainland. Consider what that means: not climbing to a higher floor, not sheltering in a solid building, only stepping into a wooden boat and trusting that the sea will let you pass. It was not an isolated episode. In 2005, during the most active hurricane season recorded in the Atlantic up to that time, so intense that the Greek alphabet had to be used after the list of names was exhausted, the archipelago flooded again. Crops were lost. Freshwater wells were contaminated by salt water. Entire communities were forced to evacuate once more. For the Guna, this was not unprecedented. It was a scene their grandparents had already lived through, and one they knew could return. And here, an unavoidable question emerges. What is a home when the place where you sleep can disappear beneath the water in a single night? The Guna answer was never to confront the sea as if it were an enemy. It was to learn to read it. For generations, the Guna have observed signals others overlook: subtle changes in water color, fish behavior, the direction of the wind before dawn. Indicators that allow them to anticipate storm surges and tempests days in advance, even before official warnings become clear. It is not intuition or superstition. It is accumulated knowledge in an environment where mistakes are costly. The second pillar of their survival has been mobility. The Guna never conceived their islands as permanent. They have evacuated before. They can evacuate again. Their identity is not anchored to a strip of sand, but to the community, to the Congress, to the molas embroidered by women and carried with them. When they move, the culture moves as well. But today, that mobility is no longer a strategic decision. It is an urgency. Sea level in Guna Yala has risen by around 20 centimeters over the past 50 years, and the trend is accelerating. Some islands have lost visible surface area within a single generation. In 2010, the government of Panama and the Guna Congress agreed to begin relocating the community of Karti Sukdupu, one of the most populated, to the mainland. The process is underway, but it is slow and painful. It divides the community between those who accept leaving and those who cannot imagine life away from the sea. The Guna are not losing only their houses, they are losing the territory that shaped their world. And the question that remains, suspended over the archipelago, between leaning palm trees and canoes tied to the shore, is this: can a culture survive when the place that sustained it for centuries begins to disappear beneath the water? The Guna face a threat that advances slowly, millimeter by millimeter. But our journey ends elsewhere in the Caribbean. On a mountainous island covered in rainforest, located directly in the hurricane corridor. There, a single storm was enough to erase everything in a matter of hours. Are you ready to discover what awaits us at the final stop of this journey? Dominica is not a large island. It covers 751 square kilometers, but it is one of the most intense in the Caribbean. It is the geologically youngest island in the Lesser Antilles. Its volcanoes still release steam. Its rivers descend from the mountains with such force that after heavy rains, they seem to boil. Its interior is covered by one of the densest and most intact tropical rainforests in the hemisphere. That is why Dominica is known as the Green Heart of the Caribbean. Here lives the Kalinago people. They are the direct descendants of the peoples who inhabited the Caribbean before the arrival of Columbus. The same people European history labeled as Caribs. This is not a reconstructed culture or a recently revived identity. The Kalinago maintain a cultural continuity of approximately 3,000 years in these islands. They have their own territory, the Kalinago Territory, in northeastern Dominica. 1,500 hectares officially recognized since 1903. It is the only legally recognized indigenous territory in the entire Eastern Caribbean. And it was precisely there that, on September 18, 2017, Hurricane Maria struck Dominica as a Category 5 storm. What happened during the following 20 hours marked the island forever. Maria arrived with sustained winds of 260 kilometers per hour, with gusts exceeding 295. At the Canefield Meteorological Station, instruments stopped recording data because the winds exceeded their measurement capacity. The eye of the hurricane crossed the island diagonally, from coast to coast, without weakening. It was not a glancing blow. It was a direct cut. In less than a day, the vast majority of Dominica's structures were damaged or destroyed. Power lines collapsed. Roads were blocked by landslides. The airport ceased operations. Communications failed. For days, Dominica remained practically cut off from the rest of the world. The Kalinago territory was among the hardest hit. Homes that had withstood storms for generations were reduced to foundations. Crops of taro, plantain, and cacao, the backbone of the local economy, disappeared. Rivers descending from the central mountains dragged trees, soil, and structures in unprecedented floods. Even the Kalinago Barana Aute Cultural Center, a symbol of cultural transmission, suffered severe damage. 65 deaths were confirmed across the island. Thousands of people lost their homes entirely. Not damaged, lost. Consider what that means on an island. There is no other place nearby to go. What followed was not only reconstruction, it was a test of identity. With roads cut off, fuel scarce, and external aid arriving slowly, many communities were left for weeks relying solely on themselves. And the Kalinago turned to what had always sustained them: community. The system of collective work known as kubuya, a form of cooperation in which neighbors rebuild together, house by house, plot by plot, was activated immediately. No contracts, no machinery, no waiting for instructions. Neighbor to neighbor, roof to roof. During that process, something revealing occurred. Traditional materials, bamboo, balisier palm, gommier wood, were available in the forest. Cement and zinc roofing were not. Several families who had lost modern concrete homes took longer to rebuild than those who returned to ancestral materials, not out of nostalgia, but out of logic. Years after Maria, the Kalinago territory remains inhabited, not as before, not completely, but alive. And what Maria made clear was not that houses cannot endure. It revealed something more uncomfortable. In a Category 5 hurricane, no structure survives intact. The only thing that can endure is the knowledge of how to begin again. That knowledge, transmitted over thousands of years, still exists. But there is one reality no ancestral wisdom can alter. Hurricanes in the Eastern Caribbean are now statistically more intense than they were half a century ago. Maria was not an exception. It will not be the last. And when the next one comes, the Kalinago territory will once again lie in its path. Not by bad luck, but because they live exactly where they have always lived. There lies the final paradox of this journey. The territory that makes the Kalinago who they are is the very same territory that exposes them, again and again, to total destruction. Throughout this journey, we have seen how different Caribbean communities live alongside the same threat. On open coasts, in flood-prone deltas, across fragile archipelagos and volcanic mountains, destruction takes different forms, yet it always leaves the same question suspended in the air. What remains when everything else falls? We have encountered peoples who build knowing the water will return. Others who move through territories where solid ground was never a certainty. Communities that rebuild by the sea after having been expelled from another land. Others who carry their identity with them as their territory shrinks beneath their feet. And those who have had to begin again after a storm that left no possible refuge. Nothing we have learned can be explained by technical advances or extraordinary materials. It is explained by a different relationship with the environment. Most of us live as if the world were stable, as if the ground could not disappear, as if climate were a silent backdrop rather than an active force. We build with permanence in mind and plan assuming tomorrow will resemble today. They do not. What we have witnessed in this documentary is another way of inhabiting the world, a way that accepts change as the norm, that understands nothing is guaranteed, and that what truly matters is not that a house stands forever, but knowing how to raise it again. While we accumulate possessions, these communities have accumulated knowledge. While we rely on distant infrastructures, they rely on community. And now, I would like you to answer with complete honesty. If everything changed tomorrow, do you think we would know how to adapt as these communities have done for centuries? Storms destroy within hours. Climate transformation reshapes territories over generations. If these cultures disappear, it will not be only because of the force of the wind, but because the place that sustained them for centuries ceased to exist, and because the rest of the world failed to listen to what they had long been demonstrating through lived experience. Before you go, tell us in the comments, were you familiar with any of these communities? Which of these stories surprised you the most? We truly value your reflection, because when the hurricane passes, what determines who endures and who disappears is not the strength of the wind, but what a community knows how to do afterward. If you believe stories like these deserve to continue being told, the simplest way to support that is by subscribing to become part of our community and activating notifications. Every person who discovers these documentaries is someone who did not yet know they needed them. Remember, this journey does not end with the final frame. It continues in memory, in conversation, and in what we choose to do with what we have learned. Because there is still so much left to discover, and this is only the beginning.